Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to be diving into the new cream eyeshadow quads from Tom Ford. So they launched 3 new quads. This one is Tiger Eye, which I am actually wearing Tiger Eye right now on my eyes. This one is called Smokey Quartz. I haven't actually played with this one yet. I'm going to be playing with it tomorrow. So I'm kind of excited. I really love these like mauve tones, so I'm hopeful. Then finally we have the Rose Topaz. Now I have already played with this one, and each one of these quads retail for $89. Now you guys know that I like to keep it upfront and always honest, and I have high standards when it comes to Tom Ford quads because they are $89 for 4 shadows. Even though most of his quads have 10 grams worth of product, these have 9 grams worth of product, but these are still pricey quads. That is, at the end of the day, what they are. They're very pricey. In case I have some new viewers here, my favorite quads from Tom Ford are his wet dry formulas, which is the quads that you will see the TF embossing on the actual shadows themselves. Those are my absolute favorites from him, and those I never regret buying because they always give this beautiful eyeshadow look. And the formula is so unique because it's a wet dry formula, meaning that it's dry, but you can dampen the brush and dampen the product, and it becomes a beautiful creamy texture. So I personally love the wet dry formula. His other quads are hit and miss. There are some that I absolutely love, and there are others that have been a complete waste of money. They either get hard panned or they have no dimension, they don't build. So I have a love-hate relationship when it comes to Tom Ford quads. And these quads piqued my interest because they're all a cream formula. I personally love cream eyeshadows. In fact, one of my favorite palettes from Charlotte Tilbury is the Super Nudes palette because these are creamy and these are so easy to use, so dependable, and they blend beautifully. So when I saw that Tom Ford was launching cream eyeshadows, I was very excited because I do really like cream shadows. Each one of the quads have a nice array of color, and each one of the quads are cohesive together. So that's kind of the information on what we got going on in this video. We're gonna go ahead and jump into the tutorials, and I'm gonna do a tutorial for each one of the palettes so that you guys can see how they apply, and I will share my thoughts immediately about each one of the palettes. And then we will jump into the swatches, and I will swatch each one of the palettes along with comparing them with other quads and other palettes that I find that might be similar. I do like to do a lot of swatches and comparisons because I do think they're very helpful, especially when you're spending $90 on 4 eyeshadows. So I really go above and beyond to share as many swatches and comparisons as I can. Then I will jump into my final thoughts, and in my final thoughts I will kind of just do an overview of my experience with each one of the palettes and which ones I recommend and which ones I don't. There is one so far that on any level I could never recommend. So without further ado, let's get into the tutorials, and I will see you guys all in my final thoughts. So the first palette I'm going to dive into is this one. So this is the Rose Topaz, and I'm excited to play with this palette. I have not watched any videos on this. I've been wanting to just really keep my opinion my own. You know, I've been sick, so coming back on the scene, I just did not want to watch anybody's review on this until I kind of got an idea for myself. You have 2 mattes. This is a matte and this is a matte. And these are both shimmers, but they're a different shimmer texture. This shimmer is a little bit creamier, I would say, than this. This is a little bit more sheer. Sheer is the word. So this purpley kind of shimmer is more sheer than this one. So I'm going to use the felt tip applicator that comes in the palette to apply this shade on the lid and kind of blend it up into the crease. I feel like felt tip applicators are really nice for shadows like this. And then I will use a brush to blend it into the crease. So on complexion, that's more of a flesh color with a hint of pink. I wouldn't say that it's got a lot of color. I mean, maybe the camera is picking up more color than this side. I feel like it gives me a hint of something, but not a lot. So we'll see what it looks like in the crease. I'm gonna pick that shade up and blend it up into the crease. Yeah, this shadow doesn't have a lot of pigment on my complexion. I think if you're obviously lighter than I am, this shade will show up. It doesn't have much dimension and there's really no building the tone. So it's a good thing that there's a dark shade in here. I actually switch and go to this dark shade right here. And I am going to press that into the outer corner. Now that has some pigment. And as you blend it out, it's a little bit on the gray side. So I'm gonna switch back to my blending brush and I'm gonna grab the pink shade. And I'm just gonna use the pink shade to kind of diffuse it a little bit. But I don't really love the color that that turns into. Not my favorite. So I'm gonna go back into the dark color and build it back up, because for me, I would rather have it be that dark kind of charcoal gray than that weird light gray. I don't like that light gray. It's not my favorite color. I think it's just going to be one of those shades that it's either going to work for you or it's not. And I don't know that there's a lot of in between. So I'm trying to kind of buff this line out. I'm just going to keep adding this dark until I feel like I get the right color, I guess. I just don't like the gray. The gray is not my favorite. Now to save the day, I might have to bring the shimmer shade into the crease. So I've got it somewhat blended. I'm gonna leave that there. And I'm now going to go into this shimmer shadow and I'm gonna use the other side of the felt tip applicator. Okay, I'm gonna grab this brush right here, the one that comes in the palette. I'm gonna go into that dark gray color and I'm just going to kind of buff and kind of blend with the pink and the black. So I think I'm going to dip my brush into this shimmer right here and I'm gonna bring a little bit of that into the crease and over top of this. I feel like I just need something to kind of pull this together, because this kind of color combination, not my favorite. I just don't like the gray. At the end of the day, you're gonna have to really love gray eyeshadow to enjoy this palette. This needs more pigment right here. I would not be having this issue if this had more pigment. So if this shade right here, this pink, was able to build and give a little bit of dimension, I would not have the issue that I'm having. I feel like it would make it so much more rosy than gray. But the minute that you put on this dark and blend it, it turns into that gray. And over top of that pink, it's really gray. So this shade needs to be a different pink. It needs to have some depth within that shadow, and that shadow has zero depth. You can apply it over and over and over and over and over and it will never build dimension ever. And I've experienced that with some of Tom Ford's shades. Just so that I can use all of these shades, I'm gonna go into this cream shade right here, and this is a warm shade. So this is a warmer tone and I'm just gonna kind of stick it over top. You could say that this is a neutral palette because this is a warmer tone, because it has a yellow base to it, but this is cool tone heavy, but not in the best way, because I've personally really started to enjoy cool tone palettes, but this one is kind of a gray tone, and I feel like I just need some color to this, and because that pink doesn't have a dimension, I don't have any color. Like I feel like this shade right here from Natasha Denona. This is Vivian in the Retro palette. I feel like this is kind of similar to what's in this Tom Ford, and it won't build. They're almost the exact same shade, and it won't build. This shade, Vivian, in this Natasha Denona, is a cream shadow, and you can't get it to build if you want it to. There's no dimension. And you can see that this is one of the lightest shades in this palette. So in my opinion, even though this shade looks darker, it's more of a bone shade. And if you guys have watched my channel, you know that having more of a bone shade in a quad is not my favorite, because I feel like, especially in a quad you pay $89 for, right? This is a $90 palette, and I don't want a bone shade in a quad. I can get that. I can pull it from another shadow if I needed to. This needs to be darker, end of story. It needs to have some pigment. It needed to be something like this color from Natasha Denona. This is Go-Go. And let me just show you why. So this is the palette. I'm just gonna, for fairness, but I'm gonna grab my brush. Now this is also a cream shadow, and Andy is also a cream shadow. Now you could use Andy or you could use Go-Go, okay? So let me show you what Andy looks like. See the dimension? And this is Go-Go. Now I can build with these two. I can't build with these two. So you're only gonna get this gray eyeshadow look. And for me, I don't like it. So I'm gonna dip into Go-Go because it is a cream formula from Natasha Denona. And I'm just gonna show you what I'm talking about and what this palette needs and why it needs it. So when you add just a little bit of color to this, it is going to really bring that softness. Right now, it's just this gray, weird eyeshadow look. It needs some color to give it something. Right now, it has no color. It's just a gray silver. They kind of missed the mark on that one, in my opinion, in this quad. I think most of the people that are gonna have a real issue with what I'm struggling with, giving it something, is those who have light, medium tan skin. You're gonna struggle with this. So I am back. I went ahead and did the other eye. I put some concealer on. Let's move on to the lower lash line. For the lower lash line, I'm gonna go straight in with my Sigma flat definer brush, and I'm gonna go into this dark shade right here. Then I'm gonna take a clean brush and blend it out. And I did struggle to get this other side to match. I am going to be honest with you, I'm struggling with this palette. This is not the easiest palette for me to use, just because they're a creamier base and the way that the shadows are blending out, I am struggling with it. It's been a struggle. When I went off camera and did this eye, I struggled, you know, it is what it is. It's just not my favorite. Okay, so I am back, and this is the final look. I did go ahead and throw on some lashes just to kind of bring it all together. And everything that I'm wearing on my face, I will list in the description box down below. I did pair it with the Tom Ford Indian Rose. This is my favorite shade from Tom Ford. But like I said, this is not my favorite palette. And I'm kind of curious about the other two. I hope that I have a better experience with the other two than I did this palette. I feel like this palette was just a fail all the way around. The one thing that I will say, I don't mind the two kind of shimmery shadows, but for me, I don't believe it's a better formula than the wet dry formula. I feel like I get better pigment from the wet dry formula, and because you can apply it dry, or you can dampen your brush and create a cream shadow with it without it tearing up the palette and the product itself. It's a very gorgeous texture and just such a great formula. I still prefer the wet dry formula over these two creams. So we'll see how the other two palettes go. We'll see. I'm gonna be optimistic, but this, on a scale from 1 to 5, I'm giving this palette like a 2. It's just not my favorite. Not my favorite. We're gonna go ahead and jump into the next palette. So I will see you guys all in my final thoughts. Okay, so we're gonna dive into the next palette, and I am going to first play with this palette. So this is the Tiger Eye palette. So those are the swatches of the 4 shades. They're all shimmer except for this dark shade. And the dark shade seems to blend out to more of like a purple shadow. So that's kind of what it looks like blended out. I kind of like that peachy shade. That was kind of the shade that attracted me. You guys know I love a peach. But let's start with that shade. I'm gonna put the felt tip applicator into the peach shade right here. And let's apply this on the eye because I do want to see what the shade looks like. Now that I have it on, it's prettier than I was expecting it to be. It is a pretty shade. You just do have to build it up. I want to see what this shade will look like in the crease, just to see if it is a shade that you can use in the crease. So I'm going to softly bring that up here. Oh yeah, you can totally use that shade in the crease. That's a pretty shade. What I will say is it's not too much shine, so it's not a ton of shimmer for the crease, but it does have a shimmer base to it, but it's really pretty. Now I'm gonna take the Rephr number 2, and let's go into the dark shade so that I can blend it. And I'm gonna focus that here on the outer corner. Much different of an experience than the Rose Quartz palette. I mean, this is night and day, the color, and it blends so pretty. And I did get some fallout with the dark shade, but I didn't put on any concealer, so that's totally fine, but just FYI. So I went ahead and threw on some concealer. Let's move on to the lower lash line. I'm gonna start with this shade right here. I'm gonna bring that right along the lower lash line. This palette is so much easier to use than the Rose Quartz palette. It's like night and day different. It's so crazy how these pigments, I don't feel like I have like harsh lines that I have to worry about blending. And when I do blend them out, like it blends so much easier. It's so crazy how different it is. Okay, I'm gonna take my flat definer from Sigma. I'm gonna go into the dark shade and I am gonna put that right against the lash line. Okay, so I'm gonna grab this shade right here, which is very pretty, by the way. And I'm thinking about putting a little bit of that like right here on the center. Because that's pretty. Look how much, like that just kind of brought it, right? So I'm gonna bring that on the inner corner. And I'm also going to bring that right up on the brow bone. It's a little bit, on the skin, it's a little bit peachier. It's almost like it's a light peach, but that's pretty. I am very impressed with the way that this turned out. Okay, so I am back. I finished the other eye, threw on the rest of my makeup, and this palette is so much better than the experience that I had yesterday. I really like this Tiger Eye palette. I think it's very, very beautiful, much easier to use. The shades blend beautifully, and the color that the shades blend into, so much better than the experience that I had with the Rose Topaz, which, by the way, if I called it the Rose Quartz previously, I apologize for that. There's so many different names. I'm having a hard time keeping track of them. But this Tiger Eye is really easy to use. These cream shades blend beautifully. This shade right here does look like it's gonna get hard panned. I'm not sure how that's gonna work. I will be swatching it, and I'll definitely let you guys know in my final thoughts if I feel like this shade is gonna run the risk of getting hard panned. The difference is, because it's a cream texture, even if it gets hard panned, I don't know if that's really gonna affect the opacity of the shade. I have so many Tom Ford Quads with shades that have been hard panned. So I've experienced it, and it's ridiculous because you pay $90 for these quads. If this shade gets hard panned, I will be curious to see how it affects the application. I'll definitely let you guys know in my final thoughts. But overall, I like this palette. Like, this is so much better. And this is what I was expecting from this cream shadows. I was expecting them to be very easy to blend, very, very beautiful on the eye, and just kind of a no fuss. The only fuss that I had is that this dark shade does have some fallout, so be mindful of that. I would recommend applying your concealer after you work with this because it does get, you know, no matter how you use it, it's a tiny bit powdery. Even though it's a cream, it's a tiny bit powdery. So just be mindful of the fact that it might, you'll probably have some fallout with it. Let's go ahead and jump into the tutorial using the Smokey Quartz palette. So let's go ahead and jump into the Smokey Quartz palette. This is the final palette of the 3 that I haven't played with yet. This palette looks to be all matte. It doesn't look like there's any shimmers in the palette. So those have some good pigment. And why couldn't the Rose Topaz shade have one of these shades in it? Like, that would have been perfect, because that shade just was not dark enough. It did not build at all. And these 2 shades right here, this one and this one, those would have been perfect in that palette because it could have built some dimension with that gray. And I'm really glad that this shade looks like it's going to blend out to be purpley kind of undertone. So I'm excited. I am excited to try this palette. Let's start with this shade. I'm going to use the Felt Tip applicator, and I'm going to put this on the lid and see what color it is. Oh yeah, that's not showing up. That might be a blender shade. Wah, wah, wah. I don't like these like flesh tone shades because that shade is not showing up. Like, it's barely showing up. So can you guys see a difference? This is without, this is with. I mean, there's a tiny bit difference. So that shade might be good for maybe blending, buffing, that type of thing. But on my complexion, trying to get any type of color, not gonna happen. I'm gonna grab the shade right next to it. That's got some color. I probably would have had a completely different experience with the Rose Quartz. No, Rose Topaz. I don't know why I want to keep calling it Rose Quartz. Now I'm gonna take a fluffy brush and just kind of blend out these edges. It blends so easily. Look at that. Like, it blends out so pretty. So easy to apply, and it has a little bit of a shine to it. Now I'm going to use this side of the Felt Tip applicator, and I'm going to go into this dark shade. I'm going to put my blending brush in that shade and just kind of deepen it up. Really able to kind of pack that shade here on this outer corner and kind of give some dimension. I like that. You guys, I really like that. I'm gonna grab a pencil brush and I'm gonna go into this dark color right here. And I'm gonna slowly smoke out this outer corner and kind of put this color at the base. And then I'm going to go over top of that with that mauve-y color on the bottom right next to it. Kind of cleaning up, and I did get some fallout from those shades. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're using pretty much all 3 of the palettes. I've had fallout with them. So, you know, just kind of know that even though they are a cream eyeshadow, I mean, it could be the way I'm blending. You just never know. But I have experienced some fallout with them. Okay, so I went ahead and threw on some concealer. I'm gonna go ahead and go into the lower lash line. And I think I'm gonna go directly into this shade right here. being that they're all mattes, they're very, very easy to use, and they blend so easily because they're so soft. And I would say this palette and this formula is pretty similar to the Charlotte Tilbury Easy Nudes or something like that. Super Nudes. It's called Super Nudes. I could not remember what the hell it was called. So I will swatch these next to each other, but they're very similar. I would say this palette is a little bit more warmer, and this Smoky Quartz is more mauve-y, but the formula is the same. Absolutely the same formula. If you like this palette, you'll probably love this from Tom Ford. If you bought this and didn't love it, you might not like this formula from Tom Ford. Okay, I'm gonna take my flat definer and I'm gonna go into this dark shade. I'm gonna smoke that into the outer corner. And I'm also going to do that on the upper lash line as well, just kind of like adding a little bit more of that depth and dimension. I'm gonna go into that dark mauve and kind of soften up that line. Okay, so I'm back. I finished the other eye, threw on the rest of my makeup, and everything that I'm wearing right now, I will list in the description box down below, along with the other makeup I was wearing with the other two palettes. And I really like this palette. I didn't have any issues blending it. I feel like these are very easy to use, very user-friendly. Even though you do get some fallout, I like this palette. I do. Now, of course, in my final thoughts, I will share with you guys which palette I like the most of the three. But as far as this Smoky Quartz, I really like it. But I am also someone that really loved the Easy Nudes palette from Charlotte Tilbury. So I'm not really surprised that I love this palette, because it is one of those kind of formulas that I really enjoy. Now, I will say this formula is very similar to the cream powder formula from Natasha Denona, meaning like this is the retro palette. This shade right here and this shade right here, those are both a creamy texture. Even this shade right here is also a cream. Now, I will say that creamy texture from Natasha Denona is not my favorite, because I have a hard time building the intensity. It's almost like I kind of have to keep building and building and building intensity. The shadows blend really easily because they are kind of that creamy base. The reason why I don't prefer that formula is just I have to work kind of hard to build it. Like, for example, this shade looks quite dark in the pan, obviously, but when I'm putting it on, I have to really build it to ever look like this. These shadows are pretty true to tone, meaning that what you see in the pan is what you get on the eye. This shade is much lighter than I would have hoped it to be. It looks darker, but I think it might be because the other shades are darker. It's like if you put this in a different pan with lighter colors, I don't know that this shade would look that dark, but these build beautifully and you can really build the dimension, and I like that in this cream formula. So that's it for the tutorial using the Smoky Quartz. Let's go ahead and jump into the swatches and comparisons, and I have a ton of comparisons for you guys. Each of the comparisons I will do with a flash and without, so that you guys can see what they look like with the flash. I think that's important, and I have a ton of comparisons. It took me like 3 hours to swatch yesterday, just the two palettes, and now I'm gonna go and jump into swatching the Smoky Quartz, so it's gonna take me a minute. I feel like the swatches and comparisons are gonna be really important because these are so expensive, so I really went above and beyond to share as many swatches and comparisons as I can. So we're gonna get into the swatches and comparisons of all three of the palettes and comparing them to other palettes, and then we will jump into my final thoughts. So I will see you guys then. Okay, so I hope that those swatches and comparisons were helpful for you. It was a lot of swatches. I tried to organize them in the best way that I could, so I do hope it was helpful. Let me go ahead and get into my final thoughts. I've been thinking about it, and I've been kind of trying to figure out which palette will I use the most out of the three. Like, which one can I see myself reaching for the most? And I think it's the Smokey Quartz, the one that I'm wearing today. I feel like this palette is going to be very easy for me to reach for when I'm using the wet dry formula. For example, I swatched it next to the Body Heat in my comparisons, and those colors go beautifully together. I have quite a few wet dry quads in my collection, and I feel like this Smokey Quartz will go with a lot of them. I think it will go with the Virgin Orchid. I think it will go with the Honeymoon palette, the Body Heat palette. I think these shadows will match a lot of different palettes from Tom Ford. So I feel like that one is probably going to be the one that I personally use the most. Obviously, my least favorite is the Rose Topaz. It's just not a good palette. And I'm not going to say that I'm never going to use it again, because I do like the cream formulas in here. I feel like they're really soft on the eye. So, for example, if you're someone that likes Pat McGrath, Natasha Denona, and you like something that's super, super shimmery, you're not going to like these. You'll definitely not like the Tiger Eye. All of the shimmer formulas in here, they're just really, really soft on the eye. The Tiger Eye, I am kind of bummed that this shade was not as pretty, and I had to really build it to get it to look really pretty. When I saw the swatches of it, I thought it was such a unique shade, and you guys know I'm a sucker for peach. So this was the shade that I was really, really excited about. It was a little bit of a letdown, a little bit of a disappointment, and I will say the thing that I am concerned about that shade, not so much the others, but that shade in particular, I'm worried about it getting hard panned. I am concerned about that. It just has a different texture than the other cream shimmers. So I'm a little bit apprehensive about it. So I think overall, I think that's the one main reason why I really like the Smokey Quartz. Even though this shade is kind of a waste for me and my complexion because it's a bone shade. Let's be honest, I've said it a million times. I'm not a big fan of bone shades in a quad, especially for a $90 quad, because it's not user friendly. It doesn't really serve a purpose. I need a shade that I can use. This is probably going to be a wasted shade for me. I might be able to use it to kind of blend it out, but these blend so easily that I don't know that I'm going to need that. I will say though, if you have this palette, the Super Nudes, the shades are pretty close. I feel like they're close enough to maybe not be worth it, because the only difference between the Super Nudes and the Smokey Quartz is that the Super Nudes is just a tad bit warmer. It's got more of an orange brown base, and the Smokey Quartz has more of that mauve base, but they're very, very similar. So I don't necessarily think that this is a palette that you would necessarily need if you have the Super Nudes. I am a little bit underwhelmed by these. I'm going to be honest with you. I like cream eyeshadows, so I'm going to get a use out of these. I will use these palettes, but I just don't think that these are something that you really need to run out and grab. They're not anything different than you already have, especially if you're somebody that has a lot of Natasha Denona in your collection and you have some of that, isn't it cream powder? I can't remember. Anyway, if you have a lot of that in your collection, you probably don't need it. And like I said, if you have this Charlotte Tilbury Super Nudes and you didn't like it, you won't like the formula in the Tom Ford, because I do feel like they're very, very similar. I personally love creamy shadows, so this is just right up my alley. But truly, I do not think that you're missing out on anything super special. And I think that's what you're looking for when it comes to spending $90 on a quad. You're wanting a formula that's so special and so unique. And I just don't feel that with these. These are beautiful, don't get me wrong, but I don't feel that they're overly special in any way, that I don't really feel like they're necessarily worth all of the money. Those are my overall thoughts. Sound off down below in the comment section. Have any of you guys bought these palettes? If you have, share with us in the comment section down below your experience with them. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me in today's video. I do hope that the review was helpful. I love you all so much, and I will see you guys all in my next video. Love you. Bye.